All right. Welcome back to the show. Thank you for taking part in my own personal journey. As I said, I think last time it's become clear to me that without this weekly show that I'm doing, I wouldn't be able to study in the way I want to. It's kept me in a certain discipline to have to articulate to myself, okay, how am I going to just say what I'm doing? And one thing that's very hard for me to do is that I preach a lot about going over your games. I preach that to people when they ask me how to get better, and I know it's very hard. And that's also just from personal experience. And so having to do this show has kept me honest in that regard. And certainly in this kind of uncertain time, especially with an uncertain chess future, it's harder. It would have been easier for me to just, do other things and get distracted by life. So this show has really kept me honest, and I've had a great couple weeks just studying this last game that I lost over the board. And I think it's the longest I've ever done anything. I'm at 23 pages, and I'm not even done. Last week I was certain, I was certain I'd be done at this point, but I'm not done. And maybe I'll just start off with a metaphor that made sense to me. I couldn't sleep last night, and I was watching some German economist talk about COVID and with the economy. And the insightful thing I took away from it was that, Germany after the war was so destroyed, like the entire infrastructure was destroyed. And in hindsight, that was an advantage because you could then you start establishing whatever technology was then available post-war. And so with the COVID situation, there's like, in an economic sense, there's kind of a new sense of opportunity because all of the kind of cul-de-sacs and dead ends that people were going down are going to get rethought, and we're like going to go in new directions. And where I'm getting at here is that with chess, I certainly feel like at the very least I've had to hit the pause button and rethink what I'm doing, especially in that if this hadn't happened, I would have, certainly already played a tournament by now and not have had the time to say to myself, okay, what is going on with your chess? And especially, I wouldn't have ever done 23 pages of analysis. Like I said, I'm not even done with the analysis, so I'm sure that is something that is just going to continue. Okay. I thought what I'd do is show a picture, and this is page 20 and 21, just to give you a sense of the way it works. Often I have more words than you see here, but sometimes you just need to go variation again and again and check it and recheck it and just discover interesting ideas. So if you look close, there's like a little dot before a lot of these things, and that just means that I'm starting a new variation or trying it out again. So that's just been a cool and interesting process. And I think a lot of people know that this is the way to improve, but it's just so hard to do, especially just getting started in on it. I did a interview with the Perpetual Chess Podcast with Ben Johnson. What was it? Monday night, and that's going to come out sometime next week. Anyways, he's talking to all kinds of people, and he's a big fan, for example, of Yermolinsky's Road to Chess Improvement, which is really all about studying your own games. And despite all that, Ben and other people on the show are not able to do it, and instead are reading. He's into reading books. Other people are doing things online, especially, say, with openings and puzzles, which I don't want to say is poor. It's just you're never going to re-examine your assumptions about what's going on in the game. That's just my opinion. Okay, so one thing I want to say that was great about last week was that I had Josh Friedel on the show, and one interesting, let's say, big picture thing about playing successful chess is how how much does it help if you are familiar with the structures in a given opening, or that's going to arise out of it? Not necessarily theory, right? Like, for example, this position we have on the board, this has nothing to do with any kind of theory. But what we're going to get a little later on is both a Rui structure and then a kind of close to King's Indian structure. So the question is, how much does it help? And personally, I want to say I enjoy the freedom of playing different structures, and I guess I'm also, like everybody else, inspired by the top players in the world who are able to do all the different structures and to play different openings. That said, I think what was interesting about having Josh on the show was that there were a couple points where intuitively, because he's a e4, e5 player, and has been for decades, intuitively sensed the questions much quicker than I did, both during the game and after. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for me, like, oh, right. Oh, right, this does make a big difference if you are familiar with certain structures. So even though I don't regret having done this opening, it cost me time, because one of the reasons I lost this game, maybe the biggest if you add it all up, is just that I took too much time in certain positions, and of course not having what we call a feel for the position. So I will get to the howler that I played that we finished last week with, but I did a great thing where I just spent like a day and a half. When I say a day, I just mean, I can't study all day. I have other things going on, but oftentimes if I'm lucky, I can get, say, 3 hours in a day. And I spent some time just thinking about the things that Josh said, trying to evaluate how I felt about it. It was very interesting. So I just want to, before we get to where we were last week, I just want to go into some of the positions that Josh and I were talking about. So the first thing here, my sense of opening's gone great for black, absolutely great. And I felt that a3 was a mistake, and Josh was like, oh, you should probably do it anyway. So I felt, for example, that white could get an equal game with castles, bishop e7, and knight h4, where I feel it's very rich and complicated. And I spent some time looking at this, and I don't have any great answers. But I think like g6 is going to come, and then, the party's going to start. Whereas this I felt was an important tempo loss. So let me fast forward to next week. What I'm going to do is, not only am I going to finish this game, like I said, I'm at page 23, I'm not even done. I'm going to finish this game, but then I'm going to do something else that's very difficult for me. I have a hard time doing the computer evaluation at the end of it. Just forcing myself to do it, and also like encountering the machine's recommendations. I often it's really psychologically hard for me. And I think might be fun for other people, but also just a way to force myself is going to be next week. I'm going to ask the machine about a variety of these positions and get its sense about the right and the wrong. So my sense is that castles with knight h4 is a roughly equal position. Well, let's call it with fighting counterplay for both sides, and a3 is a little bit better for black. And I'm going to show you a couple of these positions. And this was, in fact, one of the few ones I kind of disagreed with Josh's intuition. To me, as a tempo fiend, a3 is a big deal. Okay, so here we go. Castles, rook e1. Rook e1 too, one of the reasons I thought knight h4 is like rook e1, so many positions I want the rook on f1. Okay, queen c7, b3, very hard position now for white to find a plan. And both Josh and I felt that this was poor, knight a2, And in my analysis after I spoke with Josh, I felt knight b1 to d2 gives black just a small advantage. So Josh and I agreed that in this position, ed, knight d4, a6 was definitely an advantage. This will be an interesting question next week of how big it is. You know, my guess is something like 0.4 or 0.5. We'll see. Okay, so one thing I want to stress to myself and to the audience is that there are every game you make mistakes, and certain mistakes you should really slap yourself for. Be angry with yourself. And other mistakes, less so. And this is definitely one of the ones I'm angry with myself. Even though, as Josh pointed out, my position wasn't as bad as I thought it was. In fact, it was just fine, mostly because of the displacement of white's pieces. Now, as Josh pointed out, and I did know this during the game, that we now have really what's close to a Chigorin position in the Ruy Lopez. In the Chigorin, you play knight c6 and then knight a5 and c5 and queen c7. And, the difference here is just the weirdness of the pieces. The pieces are not where they are in the Chigorin, even if it is a Chigorin structure. For example, in the Chigorin, this bishop would be over here, and this knight would probably end up being on f1. And this bishop totally probably sitting on c1. So the pieces are all in different places. And nevertheless, Josh's ideas, I felt, were pretty useful. Okay, knight b6, and white makes what I still assume is a significant mistake with bishop c3. Now, I think it's important to note that with this move, you do get a sense of white's hopes and aspirations for the rest of the game. What he's really doing, I guess you could say, is he's provoking me to play a5 and then trying to say that he'll tickle this pawn until I move it and then maybe fight for the c4 square, claiming that those are significant weaknesses for me. And I totally disagree. I think that pawns are not people, and it's really the activity of the pieces that's important. But I wanted to point that out because you'll see that once you have that in your mind, you'll get a gist of a lot of the moves that white does. Okay, now one thing that Josh said that I really appreciated here was his instinct was now to play knight takes e4. And even though I couldn't make this work in my own analysis, it showed that what his intuition was, first of all, in these kinds of positions, and second of all, how poor the bishop on c3 is. And that'll be a theme that I come back to in a little bit. The variation I couldn't make work for black was knight e2. And on knight f4, at the very least, he can play rook takes, and I just feel like I'm worse. But that will be also something I will ask the machine next time around. So I played a5, knight d2, and when I first went through this game without Josh being there, I felt that my next two moves were interchangeable, really, g6 and bishop c8. In hindsight, I think Josh's bishop c8 is a much bigger deal. Now, to understand this, let's just say this structure here is really a lot like a King's Indian. So the good King's Indian bishop really belongs on c8 anyway. That's one reason definitely to do it. And of course, with g6, it's going to start to look a little bit more like a King's Indian as well. It's just the weirdness is it's not quite because there's no pawn on c4. Okay. Now, The thing about bishop c8 that I had to convince myself on was that after bishop f1, bishop d7, first of all, let's make clear what black's hopes and aspirations are. The aspiration is to say, I don't want to move the b pawn, and it's less to do about just the giving white the square, though that's important. It has everything to do with keeping that silly bishop on c3, because that bishop is actually a tactical victim. And the following variation, I think, really shows what's going on, is that, first of all, I was fearful of a move like bishop d7 because of f4. Kind of ripping things open, and now I have no way to guard this square. And from Josh's perspective, f4 was always just kind of fundamentally crazy dangerous. And so I think the answer here, after f4, is snip. And let's just say bishop b2, and then ef. And I want to stress that I don't have any absolutely clear sense about what exactly is going on, only that black is doing well. And of course it's an absolute mess, but the simple dynamics is, of course you've got the 3 pawns for the piece, but also that white's pieces are funny, right? They're funny looking pieces, and white's king will permanently be worse than our king. So this will be also interesting. I'll check this next week. My sense is, I don't know, black's a little bit better, you know? Now, one thing, of course, about doing the analysis that I like to do it really by myself first is that I don't want to, how am I going to put this? You know, when you do it with the machine is going to tell you all kinds of crazy things. And one thing I believe in is, if you can't find it in the analysis, if there's some crazy thing, some resource your opponent has and you can't find it, it'll seem obvious when the computer shows you the resource. But if you looked really hard for a long time and you couldn't find the resource, then your opponent probably wouldn't have found it either. And so I don't see a resource, for example, here for white, and that's one of the reasons I just believe in it. Do I still think this is very murky, even though I think black is better? Yes. But the 93 and the pawns and the safety of my king is what really convinces me. Okay, so I play g6. And by the way, one of the things about the position psychologically is, after c5, and I spoke a little bit about this last week, after c5 I felt that sense of guilt. Right, Josh is saying it's also like a bribe. I felt the sense of guilt that I had done something wrong, because I really felt like I should have been better before. And that is going to make me do poor things. So, bishop c8, and now white's next move is definitely a mistake. And in the analysis after, I have 2 candidate moves that both might be a little bit better for white. Bishop b5 and c4. I guess I'm leaning towards c4, but on bishop b5, one of the weird things about this is, we're going to see, I don't really want to trade this bishop, but here it really does suggest itself, because I have ideas like this, and I do have great control over the c4 square here. I could, move my rook or something, but then something like c4 is going to acquire more steam, and the bishop is just annoying because it's got bishop c6 stuff. Buffa, thank you very much. Okay, so knight c4, as I said before in the last show, a mistake, because white has a little more space and shouldn't be trading, plus my knight on b6 is really a despicable dude. And here we have my howler. And like I said, I've had 2 mistakes so far in this game, and this is the second where I feel really bad about it. The one with bishop c8, d7 is also, by all means, a mistake, but it's not a howler. Like, I feel like c5 and bishop a6 are both howlers. Now, the interesting question, though, is how bad is it? How bad is my position after I play this bishop a6 move? Now, after the game, because I lost this game, of course I felt like my position was just absolutely terrible. Well, we're going to see it's not so simple, and both sides, of course, are going to still make loads of mistakes. And especially now as we start approaching a little bit of time pressure. By the way, I felt, let me give you another financial metaphor. The interesting thing about playing when you're tired, and I'm not making an excuse, I'm just trying to say something interesting, because I had that epic game, the longest game of my life, the round before this one, is, Warren Buffett has this great quote, and he's like, look, when the economy is great and everything, like it was before this COVID crisis, there'll be a lot of companies that look like they're doing great, but in fact, you don't know how they look until the tide rolls out. And where that metaphor is interesting for me, like when the tide rolls out, what kind of shape are you in? And you're seeing that with, say, a lot of companies now. For chess, I feel like when you're tired, the mistakes that you normally make are kind of magnified. Like, you're not going to play the most ridiculous moves, and even when you're playing well, you're going to make mistakes. But when you're tired, you're going to make, like, your bad habits, let's say, are really going to come to the fore. And one of my bad habits is the sense of guilt, maybe even shame about bad positions, because I felt like here, right around here, I was like, oh, this didn't go well. This didn't go well. Okay, now I think my opponent's first move, bishop c1, is good. And I played rook e8, which we can debate, but makes at least some sense. And here, my opponent played a bad move. And we should say that, let's talk about his fears for a second. He is afraid of the knight d5, e4s of the world. Of course, it didn't work on the last move because of knight b2. And he's also afraid of the a4s of the world, opening up the position for my rooks and maybe touching c2. So, the thing about this position here is I think white is better, but only if he plays knight b2, where he has, I think, all the greatness of a positional bind coming up. And the thing about knight b2 is you're not just playing knight c4, but you really want this queen e2. Because if I take, as we're going to see in the game, the rook defends the pawn, which is very important. And there's all kinds of drama against the knight on c4 once it lands there. So in my sense of the business, this is better for white. Okay. So rook a4 was played, and so he's addressing this fear and this fear, but the rook is possibly passive on a4, and also it could be a victim to both knight c5 and knight b6 later on. Okay, now I want to stress that because I lost the game, and also during the game I felt all kinds of weird emotions going through my mind, I didn't initially say to myself, oh, that's wrong. It might have looked a little funny to me, but, it didn't necessarily feel wrong. Now, one of the things my opponent is doing great here is he's playing fast. So he played rook a4 with 2 minutes, and of course if he had lost this game, he would have said, or I would have said, he should have spent more time on that move. But just in general, the guy has been playing quickly and thinking on my time, and like I said earlier, possibly because I'm not as familiar with the position, I'm not moving fast enough. And I have the problem of not moving fast enough anyway. So, okay. So I played knight d7, bishop e3, and one of the really interesting things for me in the analysis was I felt going into this that I was like, yeah, of course I have to be worse. Now, bishop e3, by the way, is a little bit forced because I'm going to play something like knight b6, or if he moves the knight away, knight c5. Those are both legitimate improvements in my position. So, and he couldn't do bishop e3 until my knight left e4. Okay, so like I was saying, I felt real funny during the game about the position, mostly because white has like the fixings of a bind, right? In particular, if the knight gets to c4, my position could conceivably become very unpleasant. And I, of course, have a bad bishop, and you know, it doesn't look good. However, let's say some obvious things. I'm solid enough. I have a c file, and the rook on a4 is funny. And furthermore, it's my move, very important. And white really needs to do this maneuver, knight b2, queen e2, before his party can get started. So I looked at this forever, and to my astonishment, first of all, let me show you what I did. I played bishop f6, and we're going to see that this move, after which maybe black is still totally legitimately holding. Okay, but I was analyzing this thing to death. I'll also, next week, I'll ask the computer live. I'll do a live reveal about what the computer thinks in this position. But I didn't find, at first I was just like, okay, I'm trying to equalize for black. But then the more I looked at it, it's like, this is hard. This is hard for the guy to actually, feel good about this position. If you take, the d pawn is very weak. For example, you can't really get away with this kind of business because I'm always he needs queen e2 before he can play knight c4. And so I spent a lot of time on f3. And, first of all, I realized, rook c4 even is kind of interesting. But then I came up with what I thought was just a much simpler and interesting way to play the position. That's rook c3. And, no one likes to talk about Nimzovich anymore, but I'm an old school dude. And to me, it was ultimately like a Nimzovichian move because what you are doing is you're making it hard for white to play knight b2. If knight b2, a horrible tactic, rook e3 comes. And then I got this, and I got that, and I guess the game's over. So, one of the funny things about rook c3, of course, is not immediately evident what you are threatening. Now, I looked at this position forever. King g2, bishop d2, f2, queen a1, and all this stuff didn't really seem to be working out. For example, on bishop d2, for one, I can just go back. But more interestingly, I can play knight c5, and we can talk about this position because that is not a tempo because I've got a check. And maybe that's still his best move. Something like this, and but black is fine. Black is fine. I'm going to put like a queen here, and I'm going to be looking at all the squares. So, the principle involved with this move, rook c3, is prophylaxis. And the beautiful way that the dude put it was that stopping your opponent from doing what he wants to do. Back then it was only he's, right? Stopping your opponent from doing what he wants to do is in fact itself an aggressive action. It feels on the surface like it's just defense when you're stopping your opponent from doing what he wants to do. But in fact, it is a very aggressive action because stopping, really containing your opponent's pieces, is in a lot of ways the goal of chess. Right. Okay. So let's look at what I did. And like I said, my first instinct here was that I was worse. Okay, now for better or for worse, I had spent a lot of time on this position. Um, and it's a remarkable position. It really feels, on the surface, at least to me, like white should be better. And the obvious point is I'm not easily stopping knight c4 anymore. Okay, but of course I have the c file. The rook on a4 is funny, and again, it's my move. So one of the interesting things about my assumptions in this position was a little bit, I'm a victim a little bit of just the optics of the situation. Like the knight on c4, I mean, it's a great piece. No, you get the knight on c4, that's a very beautiful piece. There's no doubt about it. Okay, but like I said, there's actually loads of play in this position. Now, let me introduce you to some of the options. Okay, there's king f8, and then we're going to see something like this. And then there's a variety of plans for black to play after that, but the basic idea of this plan is to say, I'm covering all the business, and I will, I'm going to say my king is working and yours is not. It also gives me a chance to maybe introduce the position. The question is not if I'm going to sack on c4. The question is when. It is when I'm going to take on c4. That is his best piece, and that dude needs to go. So maybe I'll just show well, if he just putzes about, let's say, I am going to take it sooner rather. Well, I could play this first, and let's say he putzes some more. Putzes, I take the thing, and I'm going to say, well, I have nothing to fear. And I'm going to say I'd rather be black here because bishop b6 is going to come, and there's no way for him to trade the rooks. And of course, this guy owes me time. He owes me a lot of time. So that is one option with king f8. And I might return to that, but I want to first return to like what I think the critical variation is. But I want to first show some of the other ideas. Okay, knight c5 is definitely another thought. And it gets pretty hectic. So bishop takes, rook takes, knight c4, rook a c8. And again, this is a very simple thing for white to think about. You either take on d6, or you let me take on c4. I will take the thing and just say, I don't know, let's just say for kicks, king f1. Very similar to last time, black has full compensation. So knight d6, rook c2, let's say rook c2, rook c2, knight c4, and this is a really spicy position that if I was playing it in the game, I would definitely be afraid. And I think I came up, like for example, rook c3, knight e5, rook here, knight here touching my bishop, bishop b6, knight a5, and of course I want to play rook b2, but then knight c4 is a bit of a drag. And for example, here, not going well. So, the question here is, does f6 somehow magically hold the position? And I think the answer is that it's still pretty hectic here and say knight a5, bishop b6. Yeah, and we have ourselves a real fight on our hands. Do I exactly know what's going on? No, not exactly, but it's pretty it's the dynamic kind of position that I wouldn't want to be too unhappy with in a game. Okay, now variation number 3 is bishop b6, and the main reason I think I didn't consider this during the game was knight c4, bishop takes, and just the fear of that knight on c4. The first kind of, let's call it amazing variation, is if the guy plays pawn takes, and the reason to play pawn takes is that you're holding the pawn. Then I say snip. The rook can go a2 or a1, I don't know. Knight e4, and I don't know exactly what's going on, but I'm pretty sure I'd rather be black in this position. The knight's going to land on c3. There's going to be some business with a4 and rook c8. Very unpleasant for white, I feel. Okay, so there remains... Oh, and I should mention with knight c4, let's see here, excuse me, with bishop b6, knight c4, bishop e3, rook e3. This is a variation I spent loads of time on, and rook a6 has a very simple idea. If he does not take the pawn, I'm going to play rook a8, knight c5, a4, and I'm going to get counterplay. And it's not totally clear that the knight on c5 isn't as good as his knight on c4 if that happens. And, you know, during a real game, this would also be very hard to calculate, because here I would have to worry about knight b7 and knight c6. Knight c6, it turns out, is really just nothing. Like, I can play, I think it was rook c3. I don't really have any problems because I got this thing going on. Knight b7 was a little more scary. But again, I believe it's rook c3, knight d6, knight c5, knight c4, and the simple move I came up with was just f6, and I think I'm just fine. I think I'm fine here. Now, none of these positions I'm winning, but I'm like not toast. So again, I'm sure the computer will totally disagree with all these evaluations that I'm doing here. But I want to say, for my part, you know, let me say first, during the game, what do I got here? I've got, like, this was move 30, and I already have only 16 minutes left for the whole game. I do get 30 seconds every move, and as I've learned, like, you can play forever with that situation. So, of course, here, like, part of the problem with being low on time is you would want a good 20 minutes to get a sense of this position. After all my analysis, I'm not sure what is objectively best, but I want to say the one that appeals most to my chess sense is king f8, because I think we can leave these guys undetermined. It's not like he immediately crushes you just by getting the knight on c4. And if he does nothing special here, then I have the plan of knight c5 takes rook here, and sack the thing. And yeah, it's kind of a powerful business. So I think the best move for the guy, and this is very important also for what happens in the game, is f4. Because he needs to open the position up even before I sack on c4. So let's just say the obvious. If I can sack on c4 and kind of control the tempo of the game, not allow the position to be open, I'm going to have very good compensation. If he can open things up for the rooks, plural, then obviously it's a little bit more grief for me. So anyways, I looked at this. At first I concluded that this is actually another great example, I think, of analysis and assumptions. My first assumption here was that white had to be clearly better. And I think that is true if I play passively with a move like f6. I'm still not lost after f6 or anything, but where I think what black has to say to himself is, look, your king is better for like a couple moves, so every tempo is going to count. For example, f6, king f2, and I really do believe in white's position. So takes. Unclear which way he should take back, but I do believe gf is the scariest for black. Bishop f4, rook a6 is reasonable, and I'm threatening, or I'm getting ready to play things like knight c5. And the e5 breaks, I couldn't find a way to make the e5 breaks impressive for white. And one of the main reasons it's not really impressive is this dude is not a happy camper. He needs to come back into the game, ideally before the S hits the fan. Okay. So EF, GF, and this is one of the positions I'll ask next week about what the computer thinks. The position I came up with, knight c5. Maybe there's other moves there too, but that was the best I could find. Bishop takes, rook takes, king f2. Now, one great thing about this position, especially from a practical perspective, is that if I can open it, if I can open the position, well, then I'm going to at least have practical chances to win the thing because my bishop is angry and my king, is floating in the pocket. So if any kind of e5, at the least I'm not worried about it too much. I'll just take that pawn. So the critical variation I came up with was king f2, king d7, and if king e3, then f5 with very interesting play. For example, ef, and then gf, and I'm really hitting this pawn on e5. So there was a brief moment in the analysis where I was like, oh, wait, maybe he's still better after rook d2. Right? Rook d2, and now if f5, e5, then I guess I'm close to lost. Well, here again is like the recurring theme here. Rook ac8, and let's just say king e3. Well, again, I am doing absolutely fantastic. Let's look at that. So Josh is talking about rook g2 to g7 after the f5 business. So it would have gone like this. King f2, king d7, king e3, f5. Let's assume that he means ef, gf, rook g2. And I was looking at this. Rook d5, and let's say rook g7. Let's say king c6. Let's say, I don't know, there's more than one move, but I'm going to just say the reason I'm surviving this is because the rook is stupid. That's the only reason I have a chance here. For example, let's take it, and let's say a check. Well, totally reasonable, right? Rook a4 was awful. Yeah, so I have it. So this is a really interesting thing where, at the first glance with those pawns, right? When you look at EF, GF, you say to yourself, oh man, I don't know, this looks pretty bad. But the rook continues to be so terrible. And the whole position, let me just go back to the question on move 30, right? We're here. The whole position really demands that I do things ASAP, right? Okay, now, here's the thing. In the game, I played a fighting move that, well, I don't think it was actually losing or anything. And that's also what gets say surprising. So let's go ahead and look. So knight b6, takes, knight c4. I took this thing. Now, what I did realize was what after rook c8, I did see White's next move, and it's a real bummer that he gets to play it. If he just has to play, say, king g2, let's say king g2, and I play rook c4, then I'm real happy about this position. I'm not claiming I'm better. I'm not claiming, I'm not claiming I'm winning. I'm not even saying I'm better. I'm just saying this was my dream. I would, I would love to play this position. So c3 happens. Good move. Rook c4, cb, ab, and well, we have ourselves a real interesting gut question, which is, well, what do we think? Is Black like worse? Is he lost? Is he fine? You know, really interesting questions. So I'm going to ask Josh, now that I got him on the line here, just what his first intuition is here for what's going on in this position. I'll let other people think about it too. It's really a, I did see this position when I played 30, what was it, knight b6. So, it wasn't like I went into it blind. I saw this, and my own personal sense was just that it was something like, I didn't think I was better, but I thought maybe I'm worse, but I really didn't think, especially on a practical level, that I was going to have trouble. Josh says, I like White, but it looks concrete at the moment. Fair enough. I think, by the way, one thing that I took away from this was that Magnus has this quote that he says, the reason he's better than other people is, at least at the level he's playing it at, is because he knows when to go all in with the pieces and when to pull back. And I have a real trouble with that. And one thing we're going to see here is, like, I'm playing a lower rated player, so I just feel like, I want to I want to press my luck, instead of maybe sitting. So that'll be part of the interesting problem for me going forward here. Now, I think White has two ways of playing the position. And let me show you the way he didn't play, just because it kind of illustrates, I think, a lot of the dynamic here. So rook a8, king g7, rook b8. I'm assuming I got to play bishop c5. And I'm thinking rook b7 is clever to stop me from playing f5. And this position, yeah, I think this is interesting for White. Yeah, I definitely would rather be White here. And there's questions, obviously, about how Black continues, because this pawn isn't moving, and White is going to be thinking about this kind of business to open the position. So I think what I should do is probably g5, and Black is now aiming for a little bit what we could call a fortress-like position, where I'm just going to claim that White's not getting through. But it's obviously pretty scary. Now, the weird thing for White, of course, though, is that it's very difficult for him to move this rook away from the second rank, because anytime he does, I get instant counterplay, right? But I'm assuming the critical variation is going to be something like king g2. I can think about g4. I can think about h5. I can think about king g6. He could also play, actually I should mention, he could play g4 as well. Very committal decision. Obviously my pawns are all on the wrong color, but it's going to be a real question about how the guy comes to actually hurt me later. You know, he needs to get that rook all the way around somehow, and the second he goes, I'm gonna get counterplay. I could get mated. In fact, let me just show a sample variation of how I could get mated. Let's say here, here. Let's just say f6. I don't know, and let's just say rook a2. And there's some kind of dream about this. Not easy. But the dream, of course, is here, here, and then the other rook over. But even there, like, hello, I'm not touching the thing. So you see what I'm saying. He could have played f3 first. Maybe he's got to because of this pawn. But that's the kind of thing where white would have to find some really interesting way in. And, you know, all I know is that I'd rather be black, white in this position. By the way, I have not, I'm going to say we're getting close to where I finished where I'm at with the analysis right now. So I will spend more time on this before the next week's show. And I will, you know, well, maybe, I don't know how helpful it is to ask the computer here, but, you know, I'll probably ask the computer. Let me show you what the guy did. King g2. And here's where I played an aggressive move. I guess it's not wrong, but it's aggressive, and arguably I should just be sitting with a move like king g7. I played bishop d4, and the guy plays a very aggressive f4. Oh, man. And after f4, I played king g7. The next move kind of shocked me. And maybe he missed something here. So let me just first show you what he's doing and what he might have missed. Now, let's just say the first problem. It's hard for him to move the rook because of things like b3. So, for example, if you play what am I looking at here? Well, you can't you can't bring the rook into here as easily as you want. And on rook a6, thank you. That was the move I wanted to tell you guys about. On rook a6, you really got to worry about b3. Let's say snip. Let's say b2. Let's say check to the miserable king, king g7, rook b8. And obviously we have ourselves some kind of mess where honestly I'm not sure what's going on here. Maybe it's quite conceivable I'm still just worse. Okay, let's look at what he did. King g7. Like I said, this is part of the game I still need to work on. But I want to show you how this went. So rook a7, that was the point, to get this off, get my bishop off. But of course, look at that's a strong looking bishop. b3, rook f2, that was the move maybe I thought the guy missed with bishop f6. Rook b7. And here we're kind of up to date where I am. I played rook takes e4. He took here, and somehow I lost this position. Now, I'm going to give it more of a look, but to me, it's really hard to imagine losing this position. Like, if I just go back and play bishop e5, am I really going to lose that thing, right? I ended up getting frisky here, and no, that's the word. You definitely don't want to be frisky in this position. The game goes on. Oh, my God. You know, it's quite, and like I said, I feel a little guilty putting people who watch my show into watching so much about the same game. But on the other hand, I don't. I really feel like it's the way to improve anybody's chess, and it's definitely helping me. I feel like when I do one of these sessions, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to play now. Now I'm feeling like how chess works. And what I mean by that is just like there is, the tactics aren't like some puzzle rush stuff. They're embedded in the ideas of the position. Here I definitely blundered. And why not b2? Totally good question. Let's go ahead and let me just show you my blunder, and then we'll look at the b2 question. I thought I was being clever here with bishop d4. Of course I'm in big time pressure. I've got like 5 minutes left or something. And I missed that rook f4 was a very strong move. This very simple principle that I need to keep both the rook and the bishop. It's very important because they do complementary functions, and the two rooks, of course, often do the same. And I just missed, that on this I'm just losing outright to say rook b7. So that was the beginning of my suffering. We'll see. There was still chances for me to hold that endgame. But let's answer Sledgehammer's question. And before I do, we'll say that Josh kind of agrees with me. I think I called him Joel last time too. He got upset. The rook e7, it should be an easy draw. The only way White could dream about it, right, is to organize some forcing way to, get to either a7 or c7. That itself won't be easy because the bishop will be messing with a7 and the c file. But that would at least be White's dream. Of course, he has to worry about the d pawn in the meantime. I do think this is an easy draw, and I definitely got frisky with bishop d4. Because I know it wasn't part of my soul that I wanted to draw this position. It wasn't part of my soul at this point. All right, let's go ahead and look at bishop f6, rook b7, b2. The issue, well, let's see. This is definitely a complicated matter here. So the first thing we should say is that if White wants to do this, he can. I'm going to say that's totally a draw. So there's that. And what was this? Really, one of the interesting questions that I have to do with the analysis is to really kind of imagine what my grief was. A part of me, I'm sure, just thought, okay, rook e4, now the danger's at least over. Of course, I'm worried about something on the on the file. So maybe I guess that's my key concern. Let's call that my big one. How big of a deal it is? Well, maybe it's at least frightening, like rook e4, g5. But this is something I'm definitely going to look at. I'm not totally certain. Of course, I can always jettison the pawn at some point too. In fact, this rook e4, g5 doesn't even work because of rook g4. So we'll look at it, and even b2, I might have had some good practical chances. That's right, Bubba's saying it didn't work. I'm still mad. Why are you mad, Josh? What are you mad about, buddy? All right. You guys, thank you for being part of the show. It just floated through my mind that I could end up spending a whole nother week on this without being ready for the computer analysis, because the coming end game really got pretty technical. And so we're going to get into that as well. I think probably what we're going to find is that both sides still made mistakes, as to be expected, right? When at least I was, the dude was, the dude really, where he really outplayed me was the clock. Like, dude was on it with not getting in time pressure. So, right, that was definitely part of the game. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I do think, Sledge, that b2 also shouldn't be that much problems for me. at least looking at it now, but I'm going to double check that, and I'll be back next week. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for being part of this journey. I'm pumped. I just want to say I'm pumped to come play again, and doing this show is helping me do it. And thanks so much for Josh being here as well. All right, bye-bye.